You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRMArchaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRMArchaeology Podcast, episode 268 for July 12th, 2023. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about making this job work while raising children. So make sure you pay the babysitter because the CRMArchaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Heather in Southern California.
Hi, everyone.
Bill in St. Croix.
Hello.
And Doug in Scotland.
Hi, y'all.
All right. So you guys don't know this, the ones that are listening to the show here, but we are actually recording about, 15, 20 minutes late today. And Doug, I think you've got the reason for us, the topic of the day.
Yes. Yeah. So the reason I'm late is because of children. And that's the topic of our episode today, children in archaeology. How do you do it? Or don't, as the case may be for some of us.
Indeed.
But I believe as Chris is the only childless person on the podcast today, you have apparently some strong opinions you'd like to give us poor folk who have children in archaeology.
Listen, I just want to know, we record this for everybody that's listening here. We record this on a Sunday morning for most of the people on the show, except for Doug, where it's 8 hours away from now. So it's like 4 something in the afternoon, almost 5 over in Scotland. And I just got to know, like, this is only an hour. It's an hour once every 2 weeks. It's 0.01% of your time for the entire 2 weeks. And yet it seems like kids always take a factor in not just you, Doug, but anytime I'm dealing with like somebody else with children and I know they have a partner, I don't know what time of day it is. I don't know what their situation is, but it seems like they can't come up with a time when they don't have to personally deal with the kids. They're still doing it while they're on the show. And I'm like, can't you just like get some help? Like, what's going on there?
Oh, wow, Chris. Yeah, man.
Yeah, not only that, Chris, but that is the help. If we don't raise it, who's going to take care of you when you're old?
I know. I'm just saying. It's 1 hour. 1 hour. That's all I'm saying.
That's your incipient help.
Oh man, I'm gonna throw out some stats on this. So like for like my public archaeology stuff, like I had to look this up for a while ago for a presentation and all this thing. Like there's this huge thing, and like so if you go to like your state archaeology society in the States or your local society, your city one, or I don't know, Pennsylvania has like a dozen like regional ones or something like that.
Sure. And
in the UK, there's hundreds of these ones, and the average age is probably like pushing 70 at a lot of these things. It's like a lot of older people, and I swear to God, every few years there's a survey, and people are like, "Oh, the average age is like 68, 70." They're going to die off. How are we going to keep all these groups going? And of course, it's been 20 years of this. And the reason is because, once you retire, you actually have time to have like passions and stuff like that. I actually looked up the stats, and like the people who are retired have something like a ridiculous 30 hours per week of like leisure time. And then the one group that has the least of like all the demographics are women with children, and their leisure time is like half an hour. So, Chris, when you're asking like, why can't we just find an hour, man? Like that's double the leisure time that people with. I shouldn't say that because like fathers get. Not every father, and it's not, it depends on relationships, but usually women take the brunt of childcare. So like, Yeah, they're the least. So like maybe a father might have like an hour and a half, but yeah, man, like statistically, there is no time.
Those are probably including the time that we're in the bathroom. I think that's what they're putting as the male leisure time is just that, right? Because we go in there and lock the door and just hide with our head in our, on our knees and just with our face in our hands. Just, I don't want to go back out there. I don't want to go. I mean,
the silent weeping there, Bill. The silent weeping.
Yeah. This show is only really possible because my wife did for many years when my kids were little, occupy them, find some kind of a way for them. And I, when I was in Arizona, I literally used to sit in a closet and record the podcast.
I know.
And I could hear them knocking on the door trying to find me. And I would just hide in there to find that hour. That's how you do it. Either you hide under the bed, you hide in the closet, you lock the door in the bathroom and hide. If you don't hide, you're only going to be on that 30-minute, free time thing when they're little. Then when they get older, it's awesome because then you have tons of time because they don't want to have anything to do with you. And now all the shit that you didn't do for like 14 years while they were little, you now have to do every day. Otherwise, the whole ship's going to sink.
Right. And Doug, I understand not really having a separate space to record in because you live in the UK. So you probably live in a 125 square foot, studio apartment like everybody else does there, unless you're rich.
Dude,
it's
I'm
like
not
one
a
direction or the
millionaire.
other. Yeah, exactly.
That's massive. You're on like American versions of like space and like rooms and stuff. What?
My RV's probably bigger than your
Triple
apartment.
digits? Like we kind of semi are joking here, but honestly, like how many? Can you do square meters? How many square meters is your RV there, Chris?
Let me do a conversion real quick. Let's see.
Okay.
350.
500 square feet, 600 square feet.
About 32 square meters.
Okay. So my place is slightly bigger than yours.
But there's a kid that runs all of those meters.
But there's no kids.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So like, Chris,
no
you
kids.
practically have like 600 square meters there in terms of space. It feels like, it might be only 30, but it feels like 600 without children.
No, not really though. My wife is into knitting and crafting, so most of the square meters we have are taken up by yarn storage or in-work projects. So
yeah, but yarn doesn't make any noise or move.
Yes. Yarn is not actively trying to kill other yarn.
We can stack yarn up to the moon and it still wouldn't be the same as a toddler.
Okay, so let's get into this. I think, Bill, you of all of us, especially on the podcast here, because you've had little kids. At least you did back in the beginning of the podcast, and you were doing field work, and you were going to school at various points, and you had kids, and you have a wife, and you had field work, and you're working CRM, and I mean, how did you even get close to making it work besides staying in a closet?
Hiding in a closet crying was one piece, except for when I was recording the podcast. That was, that was one way that I managed it. But, aftercare was like a critical piece. And then I was fortunate that my wife had a job where she could drop kids off and I could pick up, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So when I was still doing CRM and my son was little, if I was in town, then I could drop my son off at aftercare or preschool, actually, before he was in school, preschool, right? So I could take him to preschool, and then my wife could get him afterwards, and we had to pay I don't think that folks really understand, but it's like more than a mortgage to pay for preschool for 2 kids. Hmm. And so it doesn't matter where you live, man.
Yeah,
if it's cheap somewhere, then that means that you're just still paying less money than someone like San Francisco. But either which way, it's pretty much the equivalent of a mortgage. And so we had to pay the extra because, of course, somehow aftercare is you can show up in the morning with seconds to go before you go to your job, drop your kid off, race to your job, and then start working. And then you need to just basically appear exactly at 5, or you have to pay this extra time thing for an hour or 2. A lot of them have this kind of tiered paying. So then you're paying the extra time because you can't commute or get to your kid. So that's definitely how we survived when my son was little. But then when I had 2 kids, I was in my PhD program. So I could drop them both off at preschool, go to campus and work, and then go and get them before that extra time thing. And then, of course, when my son was in elementary school, then he just went to aftercare. Aftercare is more affordable than preschool by a large margin. And so as your kids get older, you actually spend less money on preschool because they only need aftercare because school basically takes up the other half of it. And so the only way we were able to make it work is that my wife could be flexible and do that when I was in the field, right? So when I'm in the middle of nowhere, she has to do all of that. She has to take them in and she has to pick them up. And so for, until the pandemic, till we could work from home, that's just what we did. 11 years, 11 years of that.
So, Bill, as somebody with no kids, I mean, obviously I've heard of daycare, but I don't think I've ever even heard of aftercare. Is that like a Tucson thing, or is that all over the place, or just the term for a place you'd send your kids after school?
Preschool is huge because, and I actually feel like you should spend as much as you think is functional on preschool. It's actually worth more than college. In fact, don't even save for college as long as you can send them to a good preschool. Because at a good preschool, they'll get to learn, they'll be way ahead of other kids when they get to kindergarten. And so I feel like the money is best spent when they're really little. Of course, that's when you have the least amount of money. So that's pretty rough. Preschool is like all day or daycare, right? So you want to send them to a preschool / daycare.
Yeah.
And then they'll keep them from anywhere from like 8 a.m. or 8:30, unless you pay extra money to drop them off early. And then you can come and get them, and you need to be there by like 6 or 7 or something like that, or they start charging you. And if you do it too many times, then they'll just kick your kid out. And it is really, really crazy hard to get your kid into preschool. Crazy hard. Okay. Aftercare is a cool thing that's run by usually your school district or your city parks or something like that. And so that's associated with your school. So when the kid finishes, they just kind of go with aftercare kids and finish their homework, and then they get to play and hang out until you can come and get them. But of course, you drop your kid off at school and then they just stay there for 2 to 3 hours after school. And it is way cheaper because it's pretty much subsidized by the school, but it is even harder than preschool to get into. I mean, when we got to California, if aftercare opens on April something in the morning, when the city parks thing opens at like 9 a.m., you need to be there around 7 o'clock because you need to be there with a full check to pay for all the aftercare. Because seriously, if you don't understand how it works, man, your kid is not getting an aftercare. So the day it opens, you need to take that day off or that entire morning and be in that line and sit there and wait to get your kid in because it's just such a high demand. I mean, it's ridiculously competitive. I'm not even talking about education wise. I'm talking about finding a place that's safe where they don't just watch TV all day to put your kid while you go to work.
Right. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. I mean, I knew a lot of the resources related to children. I mean, like daycare, preschool. I mean, good schools, things like that was always competitive. But yeah, I'd never even heard of aftercare, but that totally makes sense. We just went to, the boys club, boys and girls club.
Yeah.
We just let us go there and do whatever we want.
Yeah. So that was what my sister had when she was in middle school and she lived with us in Seattle. She went to the boys and girls club and that was only like $50 or $60 a month or something like that. This was 2008 or something like that. I think when I had kids in preschool, when they're babies, it's even more expensive. But I think when I had kids in preschool, they were both going to the same preschool before my son went to school. And we were living in Tucson. And I think my mortgage was like $900 a month. And I think I was spending like $1,200 a month on preschool. And then when we moved to California, my son was in aftercare and my daughter was still in preschool for 1 year. And I think we were paying like, I don't even remember, man, like $2,600 a month for that.
Wow.
And you got to pay for the aftercare in either 2 lump installments, just the way it works in my area, or, pay it all at once. And we would always pay it all at once just to make sure that we didn't get slammed later on. So then we have time to save up to pay for the other kids' preschool, which was like $1,100 a month or something like that for 1 month. And I had to be there by 6 o'clock on the dot, or I got $50 every like 10 minutes that I was late. And I took the subway. So, when you're riding on the subway, if it's late, they just start racking on the fees and there's nothing you can do. They're like calling you instantly, like compulsively calling you. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Just to know you're getting $50 just to know. And it's just the worst thing in the world. So you got to really leave work in the Bay Area. You got to leave like an hour and a half, 2 hours early to make sure that you're there because you can't tell what's going to happen on these roads. So that's why one person's got to go in early and the other person's got to drop them off. And then the other person leaves early. And then my wife would like work and she wouldn't get home till like 7 because it's an hour and a half or so on our commute.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. And that's when everyone's in town and working together.
Man, well, I don't even have kids, but you're wearing me out just telling the story. So let's take a break and then we'll come back on the other side and see what the other guys think about this. Back in a minute. Hey everybody, Chris Webster here to talk about one of the latest supporters to the Archaeology Podcast Network, The Motley Fool. Now, I've been investing in the stock market through various applications for a few years now, and everybody who's listening to this can benefit from that sort of investment for the long-term financial planning. And also, I know the hosts of these podcasts can benefit because as archaeologists, like none of us get retirement. We all have to kind of fend for ourselves. So investing in the stock market is a good idea, but not everybody can do it. And look, we get it. The market is complicated and confusing, and to many of us, it simply doesn't make sense. In fact, where do you even start? Take all of the guesswork out of it with the Motley Fool Stock Advisor. The Motley Fool has been around for over 25 years and has been spot on in recommending some of the world's most important companies before they hit the big time. I'm talking about Amazon, Tesla, Netflix, Starbucks, all before they exploded in value. With their easy to use and super informative service, Stock Advisor, you could join the ranks before they potentially find the next big thing. After all, their average stock recommendation is up over 400% as of April 10th, 2023. And no need to be intimidated by financial jargon or market complexities. As the name suggests, these guys don't take themselves too seriously. Now, finances, that's a different story. Their friendly and relaxed approach has helped over 700,000 people move closer to financial independence, all while beating the market and having fun. New members can access Stock Advisor for only $89 for their first year, a full $110 off the full list price. Don't sit on the sidelines and think about what could have happened. Visit fool.com/APN to start your investing journey today. That's $110 discount off of $199 per year list price. Membership will renew annually at the then current list price. So again, check the link in the show notes of this episode. Welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 268. And we're talking about raising children in the field. Well, raising children while being an archaeologist, I guess, not necessarily in the field, but maybe sometimes in the field. We just heard Bill talking about how much of a struggle it was, and that was with a 2-parent household. You just got to have massive coordination. But what if you're a single parent and you're trying to raise kids and do archaeology and have a career? Heather, you've got some really detailed experience with that. How'd you do it?
Yeah, I sure do. Well, so when I started, my kids were, 6 and 9 when I started in CRM. So it's a little different. I didn't have the daycare thing, but I will say that when I did have, my kids were smaller. And as far as everything that Bill is saying, and I'm not going to reiterate it, is correct. I went a little different route. I decided that with my other career, or what I did to make money before I went into CRM, I focused on, I said I was going to not do a regular daytime job until my kids were in school, meaning kindergarten. But I did preschool. So I did work a little bit during the day, but it wasn't like I had to be here at this time until this time. So I did something called a cooperative preschool, which allowed me to work 3 days a week and then 2 days. So the parents are part of the preschool. So you put in 2 days with the preschool and you have really good, sometimes a lot of times these are offered with like adult schools or parks and rec departments in a city. And they're actually excellent because they're run by people who are child development experts with masters or PhDs in child development, have been doing this for many, many years. And the concept behind it is that they teach parents how to parent better while also being a preschool. And it's a full-time preschool. The kids go 3 times. Well, I didn't say full-time, like from 8 until about 1:30. And you put in 2 days, then that gives you 3 days to have that period of time where you can work. And so that's what I did. Plus I would work at night when my then husband would come home, and basically I didn't start working until they went to sleep, basically. Yeah. So it was tough, it's tough and set me up for never having a good night's sleep, but which is carried through the rest of my life. So when I ended up going into CRM and my kids were 6 and 9, actually even a little bit earlier than that, I think it was four and when I really, really began, it was about 4 and 7.
Yeah. I
had a very, very good friend that would care for my children. I was also going to school at the same time, and I was working full time, and I was in graduate school. So it was tough, but I did have some great teachers, and I also had very well-behaved children, and I scheduled everything. My whole life was my children, school, and work. There was no extracurricular of anything, no going out with friends. That was my focus, and I understood that. And it was, it was taxing, but I'll tell you one thing, it bonded my children and I together. Now, there could have been a myriad of different ways that this could have gone, but I think the bind that my children, or the closeness that I have with my children, is because we were a team together. This was not something that mom was doing alone, they understood that this was something we were doing together so we could have a better life. And it wasn't like this mantra that I said all the time, like we just understood it. And I was very fortunate to have some wonderful professors. I didn't take advantage of it. There were some classes it wasn't appropriate to bring them, but there were sometimes, like if I was working in the lab and doing lab work, my professors, I even had some of them were like, hey, I've got some great movies, and they would put it on the big screen. And or my kids would actually sort with me. My kids got very good at sorting, distinguishing fishbone from the rest. I mean, it was a team effort. And I really do think that in the long run, it helped our relationship. But it was tough, and I think I couldn't have done it without supportive professors and without the help of a best friend at the time who we had children around the same age. I helped her whenever I could, and she helped me whenever she could. And that was the only way I was able to do it.
Wow, that's crazy. And so that was when you were in school, and,
school and working, both.
School and working. I mean, how do you do like out of town field work and stuff like that?
Well, I got very lucky. I was on I shouldn't say I got very lucky. I worked towards working for a company where I could get a local job. And I ended up on a Superfund cleanup site project that was probably one of the coolest projects I'll ever be on in my entire life, which was my, one of the first ones I did. And that was a long term. I worked on that project for 4.5 years. And so that didn't happen by accident though either. I pursued something like that. I knew that the only way to do this was if I could have a local type job that would sustain me through that period of going to school. I did travel a little bit, but the only time I would travel so that I could either do a trade-off with my employers where you've been great to me here. I'm going to I'll give you periods of time that I'm able to go wherever you want to send me. So it was kind of a deal that we made. And so when my ex-husband at that point would have the kids for 2 weeks during the summer, I would say, okay, I've got or 2 weeks here or 1 week there. I said, I have these 2 weeks, wherever you need me, I can go. And then that's when I would travel, was when I had those periods of time where he would have them for a straight shot. It takes a lot of planning.
I think you hit the nail on the head, though. I mean, that's kind of the way you do a CRM career is you create it yourselves. So many times we see people in like social media groups and things like that saying, oh, I can't find a job doing this exact one tiny little thing, but you've got to be flexible and find the things that match exactly what you want to do, because they are out there. You might have to be extremely flexible for it, but those things are out there, and you don't just necessarily take what's coming to you. I mean, find the things that fit your lifestyle and what you need and want to do. It doesn't always work out that way. You had a pretty good circumstance there, but you can craft your own luck.
Yeah. And you have to have a dialogue. And I know that's scary, especially if you're newer in your career. It's scary, but it's actually an opportunity for you to get to know your employer. And I say this to my kids all the time, just in general, when it comes to teachers. I say, I know it's scary to go over to a teacher, a professor or a high school teacher and say, I need help. Like, I'm buried. I don't understand this. And you think, oh, they're going to judge me or whatever. And I said, most people want to help others. And when you go to them and you say, I need help, and you're just asking for, you say, listen, these are my situations. I'm not asking for anything extra special. I'm going to work, but I just want to say, this is where I'm at. Is there something that we can do here? And the employer, any employer, most people are going to want to help you. And in fact, it's an opportunity for you to build a relationship with your employer or your professors, and they have buy-in now. Like, they are invested in you, just like you are invested in your career. And so, no one can make this life a success alone, right? We're not on an island. We need help from each other. You just have to swallow the pride and ask for it, but also don't expect it. You can't go in there like this attitude of, you're going to give it to me, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's also a good way to sort of figure out who you want to work for. Now, I do realize that, certain more rural locations, you may only have one archaeology employer and that's it. But usually, like in most Most larger cities, most states, most places, you're going to have a couple of choices. And this is a good opportunity to find out who you actually want to work for. And it goes both ways. So like, one, a lot of employers will have had children too, so they'll understand. But two, it's how flexible are they willing to be, or how much are they willing to work with people to get the best out of them? And that's getting the best out of you if you have children and trying to work around a tough schedule like that. So it is a good opportunity. As Heather said, don't expect it, but it is a good indication of a good employer if they are willing to work with you around issues like that. And as Heather was saying, you have to make that ask. And especially it'll be intimidating when you're maybe like, this is your first job and you're afraid of losing that job and that experience. But I would say it's better to get that out of the way earlier than suffering and waiting for years only to find out that you actually really don't want to be working for that employer anyways.
Indeed. Now, Doug, you had a comment on sleep earlier too, talking about working at night and that kind of schedule.
Yeah, revenge work. So like, yeah, no, it's this thing. So like with small children, like you really, when they're home, yeah, maybe you can answer a quick email here with autocorrect or auto suggestion where you just type away and hit OK. And like there's little bits and pieces you could do here, but you can't actually do much with children around, young children. I don't know. Maybe it gets better, but from the sounds of it, from Bill, I have
does
to wait
get better.
at least another decade or so.
No, it gets better. How old is your daughter?
3.5.
Yeah, you only have like two. You only have like 2 more years. You're good. You'll make it.
Yeah. But like when they're younger, you just can't do work, and then getting them to bed is a chore. Basically, you're tired, you're exhausted, but it is the only time you have alone without like children and stuff. So you end up doing work when you should be going to sleep, because it's your only time to have some solitude. It's the only time to get stuff done. My wife and I have talked about it, and it was actually one of our friends she's a former archaeologist who also talked about it and basically coined that term, like revenge working. It's like late at night and you should be asleep because like, your kids are going to be up like 3 times during the night. You're not going to get solid hours.
Yeah.
But you just work because like, yes, it's freedom.
Yeah. My son was a horrible sleeper, but I lived in Arizona. So a lot of times we had to leave for work at 4 a.m. or maybe even early to get there when the sun comes up. So when he was really little, I'd wake up at like 3:45 or 4 and then hang out with him for an hour or two till he was ready to go to sleep. And then, I'd put him back in with my wife, and then I'd get ready to go to work, and then I'd work and like come and get him from aftercare. And it was really tough when I was like in Tucson and not out in the field, because then I'd get home at like 5 o'clock and I'd be totally drained and exhausted. And as soon as my wife would come home, I would just go to sleep, basically. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, I'd pass out, and then I'd do it again. I'd wake up. And that time from like 5 to probably 7 or 8 in the morning, if I was in town, was the time that I could actually write. And I also started taking naps in them. Like, people laugh at me, man, but at lunch, I would just eat my food and then sleep. And I also, when we were in Arizona and it was super hot, I would just, save up all the breaks for the whole day. And then we would just work, if we were doing a 10-hour day, we'd work like till we only had a couple hours left in the day, and then use like all your lunch and all your breaks at once. So you get an hour, and then sit in the air conditioned Jeep or whatever. And I'd sleep for 20 or 30 minutes just so that I could survive and, drive the Jeep to get back home. And now my son is 13, my daughter's 10, and I still wake up at 4:45. Like, even when I go to sleep at like 11 o'clock, I'll still wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and then maybe I can go back to sleep, or I'll just sleep in the middle of the day too. The naps, like, I just don't stop. I just keep doing a nap.
I wish I could nap. It's just not something my body allows me to do.
I just pass out just like an old granddad.
I have somebody on my team who has a 7-month-old, and, she's been on our team for 5-6 years. We have a program. Basically, she just, there was a point where she was actually moving to another area, And my boss at the time was like, okay, well, we'll just say goodbye. And I knew she was so valuable. And plus she's become a friend over the time. I said, we need to bend over backwards here to make this work. I think she can still work from us. And so we started already on that path of making things work even before she had children. And it worked out well. And she was working remote even, before COVID. It was, an employer having flexibility with a very valuable employee. So that's one thing to think about, is that this isn't just, in this day and age, I think a lot of times there's a lot of talk about what employers are doing for employees, but it is important that you establish yourself as a valuable employee. And sometimes you don't know the employer, and it's going to be difficult because they don't know you. But the one bit of advice I would give is that you need to be a valuable employee where you're bringing value. You're not just showing up and doing the work. You're a valuable employee. So that was what this one individual was. I'm not going to mention her name just for her sake. But then she had a child, and we were, just because we're a very close team, we're all excited, and we are invested in making this work. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. I think at first she said, like any new mom, I can do this. I'll just put them down to naps, and during the day they can play and they'll be fine, and I can work. And those of us with children were like, yeah, that's probably not going to work. But she had to learn it on her own. So now what happens is we have a list of tasks that need to happen, and we just shoot that into our Zoom channel, and we have, this is what needs to happen. And we also have set her up in a role, which she had already kind of been in, but she's in it even more now, where she's the manager. She's the disseminator of tasks to the rest of the team. She's also, schedules. She keeps up our schedule. She does all of these tasks that everybody, when you are working 8 hours, you think you have plenty of time, right? But you're going from task to task to task, and keeping up the organization to make sure that the workflow is as efficient as possible is difficult to do. And so that's her role. So, and that's a perfect job to do when you have 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there. And so during the day, she works when she can, when we call him BB, allows her to work, basically. And then she does a lot of work because she naps with him. So when he's napping, she's napping. And she does a lot of work late at night. And so as an employer, I would say the advice, if you supervise people and you don't have to shut that down. You just have to be creative and figure out what would be the best role for this one individual. And we could not survive as a team without her. Our workflow would not be as effective and successful as it is without her. And so we just have a list of tasks, and she jumps on them when she's able to work. So it's not the typical 8 hours, and she actually doesn't get a full 8 hours in. She gets in what she can. And so her hours fluctuate. And that's the other thing, is that we're working. You have to talk to HR and say, what can we do? I mean, these aren't hard and fast, where she's still considered a full-time employee. She's working part-time hours right now, but we were able to kind of stretch out this concept of her maternity leave in a creative way, and working with HR, and it works. And she's 7 months down the road, and she's still working with that strategy, and it works for everyone. So it can be done. You just have to be creative.
Yeah, man, like, you're never more cocky than before you have children about being able to do work with children. Like when you described like her thing, basically we had that same thing about like, yeah, we'll be able to do this and that. And, when the kid naps, I'll be able to do work. And yeah, like, man, it's like that saying, like, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Like, every single person. So if you don't have children and you're listening to this podcast, you may have some dreams about, like, if you plan to have children, that you might be able to, like, have a minimal impact upon your working life, and you won't have to get as creative as Heather just described. And that never works out. It's like you have dreams and they are destroyed almost instantly. But it is possible, as Heather described. Like, you have to get more creative. think when you're going to have kids, you have to be way more creative than just this idea of like, oh yeah, there'll be some naps, or I can just put them in the corner with a ball or something, and that'll entertain them for like 6 hours. That's not possible.
Okay, well, we are going to wrap up this segment on the other side, and just hopefully have some words of encouragement for everybody who's going through this and trying to raise children while being an archaeologist and building a career. Back in a minute.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 268. So we've heard some good experiences and some advice along the way, but do we want to, unless you guys have anything else you want to really get out there, I want to really push on this segment, at least by the end of it, some, maybe best practices that you've just learned along the way, keeping in mind that everybody's situation is different. So these would be best practices that work for you guys. What really, helped you get through, and then people have to pick and choose what works best for themselves. And then, maybe share this episode just as a conversation starter on your socials and say what you did and see what other people did. You might find that there's a surprising number of people going through the same thing you are. And, they might have some good, helpful tips. Yeah. So who wants to go first? But yeah, I'm interested in hearing this because I have nothing.
I can go first. I can go first. I mean, the best thing about having kids is they bring you back into the present of like what really is happening and what really matters, right? Yes. And even though it seems like they're, things like, you put butter on the wrong side of the bread or something else, they're growing and they're trying to learn how to handle their emotions through experience with all different kinds of stuff, happiness and disappointment and stuff. But your kids bring you back to the moment and give you something to think about besides your stupid career. Your stupid job will drink all of your life. Amen. It will take everything and more of you. It'll suck your whole soul down if all you do is spend all your time thinking about money, what other promotions, what other little gadgets and junk you can get in houses. But the only reason to even have all that stuff is because you're a human being. And kids help you remember that. They help you remember why we're even doing this, why there are people, why we call ourselves, sapient. And then it's also great to see them grow, right? Like it's just really cool to watch them grow over time and figure so many things out. And, even folks who spend a moderate amount of time with their kids will share a lot of important memories and events with them and give them experiences. And then when you do them, same things that you used to do when you're a kid and you do them with your kids, it changes the whole meaning, right? And it makes you feel something completely different that you didn't feel before. And it does give you kind of an insight into what your parents were thinking when they took you on that adventure or they provided that opportunity, right? So I just say that, folks, it's absolutely worth it. If you're going to be a parent, don't worry about how you're going to figure it out. Don't worry about, what's going to happen with archaeology and how you're going to do all this other stuff, because there's pathways for it to happen. And also there's the reality that if it doesn't happen, you still have your kid and you still have your family. And that's what actually really matters.
Amen. I would say everything that Bill just said. So I'm not going to reiterate. I completely agree. That having children isn't for everyone. So I would say I would encourage those who are employers or managers, if you don't have children, that you talk to friends that do, so that you do have a perspective and you can have some compassion. Because I do see that there's, I've seen a lot where there's supervisors and employers that haven't had children that just don't have the compassion for their staff that do. And somehow you have to have some kind of understanding. I think just talking to friends that do have children and trying to get that perspective is good. But I think that don't be discouraged. You can have children. Again, I was a single mom. I worked full time and I was in graduate school and I did it. But the only way I did it was with the help of good friends and compassionate professors and a great employer. And so, if you don't have that, then this is, just like Doug said, an opportunity for you to find that. And, that's what life is. Life is, throws situations at you that can either, if you allow it, can, take you down the road of negativity and disappointment, or it's an opportunity for you for change and to make your life better. And so it is possible. You just have to find the right partners to make it possible.
Okay.
I'd also like to build on that a bit too, that suggestion that Heather made about supervisors who are understanding. I have worked in CRM and, academia with a bunch of absolutely horrible people who have kids who are sacrificing that time with that child and with their family so that they can do their job. And you can't fix someone who is damaged so badly that they won't pay attention to what's really going on in their life and are sacrificing everything, right? And so there's going to be supervisors who have no idea what it's like to be a parent. There's supervisors who have kids who are horrible parents and just treat their employees really horribly because they feel like whatever this stupid CRM project or this archaeology site or this book or whatever ignorant class they're teaching is the sum of their whole life. There's no way you can avoid those folks in archaeology. Sadly, there just is a lot of people. There's a lot of people who thought that they just had to basically forget about being a parent and forget about having a child just so that they could pursue this career. So, you're going to encounter them. I don't know what to say about that stuff. It's up to you how you deal with them. In my experience, I just, look at them as like, that's a sad example of what I never want to be in life. Someone who has a kid who has spent all their time writing these books or being a professor or serving on committees that do nothing. I mean, that's what I don't want to do with my life.
Man, to follow up with Bill, there's no guarantee that if someone has had children that they will be a understanding boss. In fact, probably some of the worst people you will ever meet, and this is not just for like parents, but this is like across all groups, like people with disabilities. The worst people tend to sometimes be the people who did it and got out, and they're just like completely oblivious to how hard it is, and then have somewhat of a chip or a bit of a snide, like, well, I did it, why can't you? And you're like, yeah, your partner stayed home with the children and did it. Like, you made enough money so that you could have a single income household, and you essentially had a 24-hour childcare there with your partner. But like, those people will be completely oblivious. So I don't think there's like, I mean, I have a boss who they chose not to have children, and he's pretty good when I'm like, hey man, it's 10 o'clock. I'm going to miss most of today because I need to go pick up my child from the nursery because they're puking everywhere. Sorry. And they'll be like, yeah, nah, no worries about it. And they don't have children. He doesn't have children. So, like I'd say people who do have children will be more likely to be considerate, but also some of the worst people you're ever going to meet are the ones who had children and think it's an easy thing to do because of their circumstances, and you should just suck it up and get a full-time nanny like they did.
Oh my goodness.
I've met those people, but it goes across all sorts of groups. Anything, like people will be like, you run into like sort of like the disability environment in archaeology or any disability environment, like the people who are disabled but have got by will have a huge chip on their shoulder about like, oh, I did it, why can't you? Right. So it covers a lot of different things. Again,
I don't want to sound like that person who's saying I did it, you could do it too. I just want to give, and I don't think that that's what you're saying, but I want to give encouragement. It can be done, but I think there's two things that you have to do in order to make this happen from an employee standpoint. Number one, you have to be intentional. You have to know what your deal breakers are. And those things are going to change. You have to reevaluate it, because those of us that are parents know that just, I think that's been a thread throughout this entire conversation, is that things don't go the way you think they're going to go. They can always switch up. So I think that you have to be intentional, and you have to do reevaluations over your parenting periods, but you have to say, these are things that are deal breakers for me. I must do this with my child. I am going to do this with these. I am going to spend a considerable, I'm not going to allow my work to get in the way of being a good parent, period. But what does that mean? And you have to write that down and say, this is what it means for me right now, and be intentional about it. And then the second thing is honesty. So you have those times where you go to your employer and say, listen, I'm stuck. I don't know, my friend didn't show up and my kids have not been picked up yet, or I went to drop them off at daycare and something happened, the plumbing blew and they had to close the daycare or whatever. Those things happen. And so as long as you're honest, we all know there's people that use children as an excuse to not be responsible employees. That doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen, and employers should not assume. But as an employer or employee, you have to be honest. Do not use your children as an excuse to get away with other things, so that when you really are giving a reason why something can't happen, that it's honest and it's true. So, and that's when your employer is going to, or they should, a good person should understand and work with you. But if you're always using your children as an excuse, that gets old after a time. So I would say the two things are being intentional as a parent, a working parent, and being honest.
Okay, that's really good. Any other advice or things people should do? Go ahead, Doug.
Well, sort of a off tangent, but related, is one thing you sort of find weirdly after having a toddler, as Bill was saying earlier, where they're learning to manage their emotions and that's a difficult time and stuff. But it also helps you a lot in your work when you realize how many people out there are emotionally stunted, and you're just oh man, I get it now. And you're well, yeah, they have the emotional capacity of a toddler, and that's the way they act the way they do. And it helps you walk away from toxic people in the field when you're able to sort of get that view of oh, no matter what they do, they're never going to be able to control their emotions, because they're 30, 40, 50, or 60, and it hasn't happened yet. It's probably not going to happen. But yeah, having children can put a lot of work in perspective and help you be able to deal with difficult people, mainly because every day is living with a mini terrorist. Hey, man, it's describing if you were to describe a toddler, it's like describing the Joker from Batman. Sometimes they're just gonna go in there, they're gonna be I choose violence. Today is violence. I love you, Dada. Violence. I love you, Dada. Violence. You guys laugh because you know that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It is. They even have face paint too, just like the Joker. And they don't want you to wash it off either.
No, never.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is, it gives you something to think about outside of work, because your work has to stop when you go home, because you can't work anymore because you have a family and everything, right?
Yes.
So if you have a partner, you can just sit there and grind all day, all night.
Yes.
You never have to stop. But when you have kids, they kind of make you stop. And also a lot of the stuff that I used to not like about work, team building or the constant chilling or people always wanting to hang out and stuff. Well, now I don't have to do any of that because I have my kid, and I never have to do any of that extracurricular friendship anything anymore. And it's great, because then you're with other parents who have other jobs and other things to do, instead of always having drinks with the crew and then always having this and always hanging out and always going to their barbecue. It's great. Unless they have kids, then sometimes you're roped into that.
I'll say that, preparing for being a working parent, if you have the ability to do it, if you're young, you want children, you need to start making those plans now. Start trying to find an employer that is going to work with you. We should all be trying to, working for or looking for employers. I know it can be scary, but when you're working for someone and that person is not workable, that person is not reasonable, understand that it's not going to get any better. It will likely get worse. So if you're in that situation and you have an employer that is not reasonable, and you intend to have children, it's probably now is the best time to start moving forward. Because I know we say, I'm looking for somebody else. I know that we say, well, just, we're saying, find a better employer. But when you are, let's say, a single mom and you have to bring in money, you can't just go and quit your job and find someone else. I mean, you don't even know where that someone else is. So I think doing that ahead of time, being intentional with making sure that you're setting yourself up, if you have the luxury of doing that, I highly suggest that. And then the other thing is that I do want to encourage anyone who is, members, please, if you have any questions, I'm open. Just tag me. I'm happy to help. I love, helping others through being a working mom, even whether you're in a marriage or you're out, or a working parent, I should say, working dad also. So I'm here for you. Please reach out.
Okay. Well, with those words of encouragement, I think, because, you guys have all been through it and you guys have done it. So it's proof that it can be done, I suppose. It's not for everybody, but you gotta plan it out and make sure it works. But anyway, I don't have anything else to say on this because I have no kids and it's not looking good for the future. So that's,
Chris, do you have any more comments as a non-child person? Or wait, wait, hold on. We're supposed to be using this from the dictionary thing, like a person afflicted without children, I think is what we're supposed to call you.
Right. Yeah, you got to be PC about it.
A person afflicted with free time.
I will say the only reason we record this so early in the morning on a Sunday is because of you, Doug. So I think we're going to move this back to, say, Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific so you can revenge record at 1 a.m. That's what I'm thinking. We won't hear the kids. They'll be asleep.
We'll have to whisper then so that no one wakes up like,
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have anything to say this week at all. I don't want anyone to hear me.
Nice.
Unless you clean out the closet, Doug. I'm telling you, clean out the closet. It's a comfortable place to record.
Oh man, they don't call them closets here. They call them cupboards.
Okay, well,
That's
cupboard,
true. That's true.
cupboard,
Sleep in the
closet,
cupboard.
podcast room.
That's right. All right. Well, with that, thanks a lot. Comment, share, and we'll see you guys next time. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArch podcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Doug, you gave a normal goodbye last time. I was a little disappointed for Andrew. Like, he said it, and you're just like, goodbye. I almost had to put something else in.
We need his daughter to say yes. Exactly. Yeah. We need another co-host to help with the bye-bye.
Uh-huh. All right. Well, for once, his kid's not sitting by the microphone making noise.
I know.
Like, where are they?
Doug, pre-plan. Like,
Didn't we just record a whole segment on plan ahead? If you have a kid, plan ahead.
Goodbye. Yeah, I couldn't find the child. I couldn't find the child.
That's all right.
Okay.
They better be there when you retire. Oh,
Yeah,
She's in the
the tub. No, the tub.
in the
Yeah.
cupboard.
In the tub. Gotcha.
Yeah.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.